Alright, we got three more new releases we can go into for 2025. And this chair is like really noisy. I'm going to try to be as still as I possibly can, so just ignore that if that becomes a problem. We're going to start with Novocaine, which obviously shouldn't be confused with the Steve Martin movie from like 25 years ago, which was like a black comedy. And I guess you could say this is a black comedy also. It's definitely much more in that action vein. The kind of thing we've been seeing lately, that Nobody vein and that John Wick vein, and how like one kind of stems from the other, and then there's one that kind of stems from that, and one that kind of stems from that, and it almost feels like they're all kind of in the same place. I guess you could say Love Hurts was the most recent one that you could also put in this. I guess you could call it the unlikely action hero kind of place. Whereas this one, those other ones all had the same setup where it was the person was like already sort of in that life and then they got out of it and then they got pulled back in. This one revolves around a guy that did not come from the life at all. He's like a total and complete outsider. Just his thing is the movie's gimmick, which is that Jack Quaid's character can't feel pain. So he's going to get thrown into this giant action movie, and it's going to get really violent and gory. And you can see in the concept alone where the comedy would come from, and the fact that Jack Quaid has kind of perfected playing this kind of character at this point. Who's just here being endlessly likable and doing the Jack Quaid things that we expect and that we like, so that's really all that's asked of him here. So, looking at it from the standpoint of the directors who made this, they made one other movie that I saw, which was Villains, the one with Bill Skarsgård from like 2019 maybe, and that one basically had like another promising premise that went in some really weird directions and then kind of petered out by the end. In like the last 20 minutes or so, it just kind of shit itself a little bit. And just based on that alone, you can get the vibe that these are those guys. Like, it's kind of... I kind of felt like I had the same feeling watching this that I did Villains, as far as my investment in it and where it kind of tapered off. Not, and it goes a long way before that tapering off happens, so that's a good thing. But it's like when they reach that sort of last 20-minute place, is where I guess it feels like they have consistent problems. At least if you look at these, I'm sure they've done other things that I haven't seen yet, but that's the one that I have besides this. So, going into it, we start off not too dissimilar from Love Hurts. This one's also driven by a sort of love story going on. And while that one like completely lacked any sort of chemistry from two pretty great actors, this one is Jack Quaid and Amber Midthunder, the actress with the amazing name that we love so much in Prey. And then as soon as Prey happened, it's like, yeah, put her in. We want to see a lot more of her. Put her in everything, especially action oriented. It's going to be fantastic. And a lot of how you take the movie is probably going to depend on how you take their sort of love story at the beginning. I would say it's believable enough to get the movie going. Yeah, I feel like, once again, since it's two actors that we know are so capable and so likable in their own right, you probably would expect a little more from the love story than we actually get. But I think that comes more from a writing standpoint than any sort of lack of chemistry. I feel like if this was much more of a part of the movie, I guess you could say, I think it would probably, the chemistry could have come through a lot more than is shown just with what little bit the writing gives it, because they really only get like the one night together and then everything sets off, and then it's just an idea of, do you buy into he would go the distance that he does in this movie for somebody he spent one night with. But I feel like they set his character up enough to be like this sheltered type because of his condition. They go into like all the dangerous downsides of what not feeling pain could do or could result in, and it gave him a very sheltered childhood and then a very sheltered life. So this is like the first time he's really like literally felt something when he has this night with her. So it's sort of like this burst of feeling is what's fueling everything that he does, every dangerous, life-threatening thing that he does for the rest of the movie. So I feel like this is one of those movies that you really don't... I've seen this, but I feel like you see it with every movie at this point. people that apparently went into this movie trying to look for all of the logic gaps and shit like that, and it's just like, come on, it's not that movie. It's not the movie where every single piece of logic is going to be under a microscope and everything has to make absolute plausible sense. Whatever that even means, as, you know, worlds get more and more fantastical, I'm just really sick of that shit, and I'm sick of hearing that shit. It's like, I'm not going to go into a movie like this saying every single thing around every corner has to make complete logical sense. It's just not going to be that movie. Look at it. And so, if you're willing to just sort of go with it, it's gonna be fine. So it's, obviously there's better movies in this vein, but there's nothing like that in that particular instance that I'm holding against this movie, nor would I, because honestly I think that's just a waste of time, to even approach a movie like this like that. So, yeah, you're gonna get some of the over-the-top gore, and some of it's gonna be really outlandish, and some of it, yeah, might feel like it's trying to sort of ground itself in the reality of, if you hurt yourself in this particular way, this is what it would actually look like, or this is actually how it would go down. Yeah, it does feel like there's some of that, or maybe it's like half and half that. So we get some gore that's, like, pretty nauseating. But on the other side of that, there's also gore that's, like, so over the top, where it's, like, there's a moment in particular towards the end involving a broken thumb, and this broken thumb does not even remotely resemble a human hand. This is clearly Jack Quaid with, like, a fake hand entirely. So there's that balanced out with the gore that actually it is, like, very hard-hitting and really gruesome, and, like I said, it almost gives you this lightheaded feeling. But other times, you just have to run with it and go with the fun of it, because it's... yeah, because sometimes, like I said, it's just not that real thing all the time that it's setting up to be, like, to sort of set the brutality in a certain place and make you feel it in a certain way. It might go in and out of the reality that you know. And that, like I said, in a movie this over the top, I don't really care if it goes in and out. There are also some nice payoffs to things that they set up really early. There's also a lot of things early on that feel like they're setups, but then they kind of don't really get paid off in any way. It's almost like a case where the movie would be better if it was, like maybe it was trying to subvert expectations, where it was like, oh, if we set this up, you're expecting this thing, and then we'll subvert the expectation by just not doing that thing. And it's like, the way that can sort of come back to bite you is, it's like, well, now that you set it up, I was looking forward to that thing paying off that you didn't pay off. So it does run into that at times. But it's fun. They throw in enough of the character stuff also in between the action and the gore, to make you stick with it. And sometimes it's just like little humorous throwaway things, like, maybe one of my favorite things in the movie is just this throwaway line where his name is Nathan, his first name is Nathan, and in just a quick throwaway line, they mentioned that his gamer tag is Magic Nate Ball. And I just, like, that's just one detail that I just really love, and kind of stuck with me of all the things that are in here. Just something little like that had this weird kind of staying power with me, so... and then we get, you know, big set pieces, like him going through a booby-trapped house, or the scene where he's being tortured and he has to pretend that he can feel pain. So he has to... Jack Quaid now has to act like he's not feeling pain, and also act like he is at the same time, which had to have been a really fun acting exercise. And there's a twist and turn here and there, I guess you could say, that's interesting. It's interesting that there's one particular turn that they don't really reveal in a very big way, with the exception of, like, a background music cue. And when I say background music cue, I don't just mean, like, the score in general. I mean, like, it feels very distant. Like the sound is from a distant of, like, oh, there's the music cue that says this is a big moment. I barely heard it. And but it's, maybe it's better that way. That they're like, oh, by the way, this is what's going on now. This is the thing you need to know. And it's almost nonchalant about it. And it's something that you don't really see coming. So it's not even like they hit you with something where it's like, oh, well, obviously. So, you know, what did it matter if they made it a big deal or not? But yeah, I found that interesting that they so downplayed this sort of big middle turning point, because it does pretty much entirely change what the movie is and like what the motivation would be. So that's interesting. Like, I could totally see people saying it's a criticism that that wasn't treated as a bigger deal, but yeah, and maybe it is something they could have put in a different place in the movie that might have helped and made more of an impact in some way. But now, just I'm not really saying anything because I'm trying not to spoil what that thing is, so we're just kind of going in circles now. But I guess the last thing I can really say, because it is just, you know, what you expect it to be. There's action and there's gore and all that. That's what the movie is, so there's not really much to add to that. I will say, though, when we got to the climax, and this is where I was hinting at that I kind of had a problem, was it starts like it's having a very anticlimactic finish. Where it's like, we reach our point, and like everybody's converged, and some shots are fired. And then it basically seems like it's ending. And it leaves you thinking, like, oh, that was really abrupt, and it's like, is that all? Like, all the action in this movie, that was it? That's all we were leading to? And then, of course, what that's actually leading to is that we're just now reaching the climax, and now we're going to have the moment where it ramps up just when we thought it was basically over. And then, at that point, it's like, oh, okay, now we're getting a real climax. This is good. But then, now that we've gotten over the fact that we almost had a very anticlimactic finish, now we're at a point where we reach an actual action-packed climax, and it's like, okay, great. But then this action-packed climax does eventually go on too long. And so now we're at the opposite of what our problem was before. So it's like, if there was just that middle ground where, like, maybe halfway through the actual climax, if that's where it ended, that would have probably been, like, the sweet spot. But as is, it does feel like we get a little, almost like, I guess you could almost say like Con Air's final act, or final act, where it's like, oh, we had a really good stopping point, and then it just kind of kept going for a while. So it's, yeah, so it's obviously not some perfect movie by any means. It's not going to be like on a John Wick level. I don't even think it's on a Nobody level. But it's fine. It's definitely better than Love Hurts. So if Love Hurts left you, like, yearning for something better, but in very much the same vein, this is probably gonna fill that hole. So it has a reason. It has a reason to be here. And like I said, getting more of Jack Quaid doing his thing and seeing more of Amber Midthunder after Prey is something that we all want. So there's plenty in here to still like, even if it does leave. It does feel like some things are lacking. Like I said, with the kind of movie it is, it's perfectly fine. So I'll leave that at that. So let's go into Black Bag, which is a movie that's gotten like really good word of mouth pretty much as soon as it came out, as this sort of thriller we've been looking for a while that's sort of downplayed, but it's also awesome, but it doesn't have to be big to be awesome. It's Soderbergh, and I've talked a lot about Soderbergh's last several movies on this channel, and like when he was in his Netflix era, and then when he's kind of come back to the occasional big movie, but he's typically doing this sort of middle-of-the-road sort of budget movie, where it's like he's downplayed, but he's also got like the big cast he's always been able to get, and just these really slick and brief scripts that are like 90 minutes. Something he's been doing consistently for quite some time now. In these last, few years of his career, I guess several years of his career, really. And yeah, this just feels like a continuation of that. And the fact that this movie is like, people are really saying how much they love this movie really makes me think, like, you guys have really been sleeping on Soderbergh for the last few years now, because this is what he's been doing for a while now. So you can get more of this if you go back through his filmography of the last few years, and his Netflix era, and all that. And it's another David Koepp script, which is always a great sign also, especially with the two of them together. They just teamed on Presence back in January, which we talked about on this channel very recently, and I loved that as well. And what's really fun about this one is how it does have this sort of old-fashioned vibe to it, but it does also feel the modernized version of something old-fashioned. It feels like plot-wise, maybe not in feel, but in plot-wise, it was giving me that vibe of what Preetsy's Honor was doing, and then how Mr. and Mrs. Smith was kind of like a really, really, really loose remake of Preetsy's Honor, but as this modernized action movie. And it's kind of somewhere in the middle of that, only without the action-y vibe. All of the action is in the suspense and the mystery element, and the way the characters interact, and the unpredictability of the characters. Because you have moments where there's a big moment at the beginning that's mirrored later, where our 6 main characters are seated at a dinner table, and things escalate, especially when they start playing a game. And so you've got Fassbender, who's kind of at the head of the cast, and for a while, Fassbender's one of those people that really blew up, and then he had that sort of middle where it was I kind of thought this guy's career would be more, because he's obviously very promising, but then the movies he was making and the performances he was giving just felt very, I guess bland would be a decent word to describe it. But then he's kind of found it again, and I think what Fassbender's real strength is playing these characters that are stone cold but also really calculated. His Alien, his Prometheus performances, you'll see that kind of thing, and in The Killer, the Fincher movie from a year or two ago. There, it's this is the Fassbender that I feel this is where he really excels, is parts like this, and that's in Black Bag as well. And then we have his wife, who is Cate Blanchett, who's got this very, Blanchett's always had this alluring vibe, but it's really, this may be the most alluring she's ever been, and that's saying something. But she's also got this sort of double-sidedness to not just her character, but her performance in particular, because this character is an enigma for most of the movie, and we're not quite sure which side she's leaning towards, and the way she's able to play with that, and the way they do different sort of cues to make the audience never quite aware of where she is, in regards to this story, is really exciting and really fun to watch. And with an actress of Blanchett's caliber, who's practically, dare I say, practically a Streep in her own right, really, do a part like this is really just satisfying. And then we've got, I guess the other big standout would be Marissa Avella as the kind of, well, to talk about her, we talked about the other 3 characters, who are Regé-Jean Page, Naomi Harris, and Tom Burke. Tom Burke, you might remember, he was Orson Welles in Mank. He was also the guy that took Bill Nye out drinking and living. So he's been kind of popping up in these really prestige projects. And these 4 characters here, with the Fassbender and Blanchett, the 6 characters, they're at the center of this, and the way they play this game, and how there's such an underlying hostility in their relationships, and how these characters are so unpredictable, and you never know. It plays so well into the plot, how unreadable these characters are, yet how seemingly outward with their emotions they are. Makes the mystery element really interesting throughout the whole thing. And it's you're never quite sure how far a certain character is going or is going to go, and who's trustworthy and who isn't, because everybody's hard to read. And I really love that. And what I also love, especially while we're on the topic of this first dinner scene, is we were talking about the concise nature of it, with it being a 90-minute movie. And I love, because there's movies that could play out a scene like this for a long time and really make it work. Talking about literally another scene with Fassbender in it, like the tavern scene in Inglourious Basterds, that goes on for 20 minutes, and it builds up and builds up and builds up. It's almost just as, it actually may be even more impressive when you can do what could be 20 minutes worth of build-up and do it practically right away, and the payoff feels as effective, almost as effective. I've got my Tarantino bias, but when I'm talking about the concise nature of this and the editing, which I believe Soderbergh also does himself. He's the director. He's his own cinematographer, as we know, and I believe he's also the editor, because the cinematography and editing he does under like aliases. And he's always doing incredibly in all of those. He's especially a really great cinematographer. But it's talking about the editing here, the moments where, like I said, this could have been a whole scene that built up really nicely, but it edits it right the perfect place where Fassbender sets up what the game they're playing is, and then in that moment we basically cut to they've been playing the game for a while and we're getting to the juicy part, like right away. But that juicy part still has just enough build up within it that effectiveness is still in there, and it still feels like it was gradually built up to the explosive place that it gets to. And that'd be really hard to do things that effectively and build up, but also concisely, is because it'd be really easy for like a lesser writer to try to stretch this out in a way, not in a Tarantino way, because that's always going to be effective, but in a way of like it would either lose its luster halfway through, or your interest would go in and out. It wouldn't feel like this gradual build up, probably from most writers. So to decide to cut that middle out and go right into it, but also still feel that, is really well done. So another thing that Soderbergh is amazing at, Soderbergh's the one that famously said, if you're gonna, it's a paraphrase, but the gist of it is, if you're gonna direct, don't stand in front of the camera and wave your hands and say, I'm the director, I'm here. Be invisible as a director when an audience is watching the movie. And so one thing Soderbergh does really well that I love is the subtle long takes. Because I've talked about how the flashy long takes are so played out at this point. So these moments where we're just watching everything happen in the frame and the camera's only slightly moving every now and then to maybe follow one character to a different part of the room, but for the most part everything feels like you're watching it in real time. And that's like the first big scene with Pierce Brosnan is one of these, and I can't get enough of that stuff, especially when it's Soderbergh. And like I said, it's not drawing real attention to itself. You just kind of realize in the moment after a while of you've been watching this whole conversation in one, like the actors and everything did it in one go, and it feels like you're right in the room with it, and everything is palpable, even more palpable because of that, because you feel like you're right in the room, or eavesdropping even. Or you're like the fly on the wall or whatever. So that's something this does really well. And like I was saying about the mystery element of the writing, one thing it does really well with that particular genre is it's always going to be the most effective when you can go back and you can imagine, and like things will occur to you after you've seen them, and it's like, oh, that thing makes sense now, or oh, that thing paid off in this particular way that I wasn't expecting. There's also the thing of when it gets to like the end, and basically every thought you had throughout it, the script had already taken into consideration, and the characters had already taken into consideration and acted accordingly. And you think like, oh, what about this thing though? And then like as soon as you think that, a character will say, oh, and speaking of that thing, that's the explanation. And it makes sense every time. So that's something I'm a really big fan of. And it's a really good movie for a while, and then I think when it really takes off this is another thing I'm going to try to not say, but two characters band together for like the last third of the movie that, at least to me, I wasn't expecting to see these characters band together in the way that they do. And that's when the movie like really is on fire for the rest of the runtime. And that's when it really reaches this sort of peak of everything that basically everything you wanted to see out of these characters, and the way they play off each other and react to each other. And yeah, like I said, I don't want to say too much apart from that. Even that is probably a little too much, but yeah. So, like I said, what Soderbergh can do with these small productions and these small crews, and doing a lot of things himself, the big jobs himself, and just making these really modest yet really successful in everything they're trying to do movies. And like when you're looking at like the really big blockbusters or whatever, and things are just starting to feel sort of lifeless, and you're like, what happened to like this sort of movie or that kind of movie or whatever? You're probably looking for a Soderbergh movie, and he's been consistently making these for a while now. If you just go back and track them down, and most of them are quite worth it. Some are quite underrated too. No Sudden Move was one I really liked that a lot of people didn't seem to. The few people that saw it didn't really seem to take to that much compared to some of his others, but the basketball one, High Flying Bird, I really liked. Kimmy, the one with Zoe Kravitz, is really great. Like I said, Presence was just earlier this year. He's really been killing it consistently. He hasn't stopped, and I don't think he plans on stopping, which is good news for all of us. So, and like I said, that's the thing, it's like, people are really going crazy for this movie. And it's like, guys, he's been doing this. Catch up. Go back to the others. It's really great. It'll pay off for you. So, that's how I feel about that one. So let's end on Riff Raff. There's quite a few interesting things about Riff Raff. Starting with the director. The director, Dito Montiel, who has made several movies. I have seen most of them, I believe. What's really interesting about this guy is, at least for me, he hasn't, until this, he didn't, despite his several movies, he hasn't really made anything that I took to, or I felt like really, like something that really stuck with me. His movies tend to just come and go for me. But what's interesting about that is you can get the sense that there's something very competent about his filmmaking, and there's something, like, as far as the stories go, there's like an emotional foundation throughout his filmography that you can feel, and it's like, I can see that in his movies that it's there, but they've never really hit me in a personal way to where the movie stuck with me. But there has to be something else to him to where they are working for a lot of people, because even his first, like, A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints is probably the one he might be, like, the one that's most recognizable. And it's, and that was like an autobiographical movie, if I remember correctly. From that forward, like, his whole filmography, despite the fact that most people probably don't know his name, every single one of his movies is star-studded. It's, like, crazy. There's some stuff that I saw without knowing it was one of his. And it's and it's crazy that, like, and he's pretty consistently made movies. But his movies just have not really hit me in any particularly memorable way, but he's clearly doing something right. And this is one where, and this might seem weird because I feel like this movie's kind of gotten like a mid, sort of like critical reaction, but this is the first time where I was like, I think I felt during this movie what I was supposed to feel for the rest of his movie. It's like, okay, I think I get this one, I think. Or at least I was drawn in by these characters, which is very important for a movie like this. Where you've got Ed Harris at the center of it. I'm not kidding. Star-studded casts all over this guy's filmography. And he's basically playing... He's a father in two very different dynamics. Because he's got his new family, where his new, in quotes, wife of 18 years is Gabrielle Union, and they have a son. And then he's got his failed marriage with Jennifer Coolidge, who resulted in Lewis Pullman, who's kind of in this sort of... He's entrenched in, like, this crime world that Ed Harris comes from. And so we see the two very different dynamics, where with the Gabrielle Union side of his family, he's almost practically living a Hallmark movie. And then on the Lewis Pullman side, this is like all of his dirty past and all of his bad choices and his violent past and all that stuff. And then these are verging together on this like one New Year's. And for the most part, it's the family dynamic is this movie, which is something I was expecting. I didn't know. I knew very, very little about this movie going into it, but like I didn't know it was one of Dino Montiel's movies until like a couple of days before I saw it. But I had heard about the movie long before that. I was expecting some sort of hitman movie or something, and yes, there are hitmen in it. That is the Bill Murray and Pete Davidson characters, but they're kind of on the outskirts. They're kind of living their own movie while they're waiting to come to this point to meet up with all the other characters. But for most of the movie, we're dealing with this family dynamic of these two families that are linked by Ed Harris colliding. And we get like flashbacks of this, not just like their past, but also this conflict that's bringing them all to this one place. But we're also getting flashbacks of like how, you know, Lewis Pullman met his pregnant girlfriend, or, you know, what else happened in the family. And that's what it's really... So if you go in thinking it's like a hitman movie or a crime movie, you're probably going to walk away wondering, like, what the hell is this? This was so disjointed. This, like, you know, was not anything it looked like. Which I always think is unfair to a movie. Because, like, it's clear when you watch the movie, this sort of focus on the family is clearly what it was always supposed to be. So through marketing or whatever, it might look like it's a hitman movie and that Bill Murray and Pete Davidson are like the sole focus or the main focus. And it's just really not that. And when I started to piece that together around maybe like the 20 to 25 minute mark or so, I was okay with it. And I think what really helped was the thing that was selling me was that the family dynamic was working. The fact that there's so many different dynamics going on here because there's so many different types of characters. But I found myself interested in wondering like how they each got to this point, how they develop these relationships that they have now, the estranged ones and the ones that are working. There's like one moment between Lewis Pullman and Jennifer Coolidge that's like oddly wholesome, like really out of left field wholesome, and it's nice, like it actually works. Like it makes, like, Jennifer Coolidge is supposed to be like this really sort of, you know, brash, annoying character that like basically all the other characters hate for one reason or another. And just in this one moment, this one wholesome moment with Lewis Pullman involving a joint of all things, it's like, oh, I think I might actually care what happens to this person that most of the characters don't like, and is clearly going to get them in trouble, maybe more trouble than they're already in. And that's the moment where I was like, okay. And then the bonding between Lewis Pullman and the other son, DJ, I think his name was. And it's like, it caught me by surprise that this was all sort of working for me, and the characters were working for me. And then you get these side moments with Bill Murray and Pete Davidson that are interesting. They're very much like, they feel very much like the Morgan Freeman and Chris Rock characters in Nurse Betty. And like they have sort of the same dynamic and the sort of outbursts of violence in this movie that otherwise isn't in that territory yet. And what's great here is Murray's making some interesting choices. He's putting on this unexpected voice for this character, and he's like this sort of... When you see Bill Murray, you kind of expect a character that's going to be a bit, you know, laid back and not really caring about much of anything. But this character's coming from a pretty dark place, and he's got this sort of unhinged quality, and to where he seems reasonable at first, and then he can just kind of turn very quickly on a dime into a violent person. And then as soon as the violence breaks out, he's like right back to where he was. Which is a really cool and interesting part for him, and he sells it really well. There's even some emotional moments he has to have here, and those come through really well also. He can be so funny in his older movies, you can tend to forget how good of an actual actor Bill Murray is. I know Sofia Coppola has been trying to show us for quite some time, but I still feel like it can slip people's minds just how good and how subtly good Bill Murray can be. And Pete Davidson is somebody I've been defending for quite some time now. I've been saying for quite some time now that I feel like he's a very underrated actor. I feel like he's one of those guys that could have chemistry with just about anybody. Whether it be like anybody, whether it be a love interest or just a co-star like Bill Murray or whatever, or an ensemble cast like Bodies, 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 or even when he's on a talk, like when he's on Mulaney's talk show this past week. I really feel like he's an underrated actor and can have chemistry with anybody, and I feel like that shows here also. And the fact that he seems to make instant friends with anybody he works with. Like, for as much hate as he gets, I feel like all of that speaks much more volumes to him for both his talent and as a person than whatever, throwaway comments say, just because he's banged a lot of people. But, yeah, so I really like that dynamic also, even though it does feel like they're in a totally different movie. You can sense that it's all coming together in some way or another. And I guess you could say that it is one of those movies that works more like the individual scenes maybe work better than it does as like a whole. But once again, the individual scenes are so good, I'm kind of just okay with that, I think. And like I said, the characters work so well, and the build-up of the tension works well enough. There's one scene in particular that's like particularly nerve-wracking. One of the flashback scenes, even though we pretty much have all the information already, it was still able to really ramp up the tension, even though we kind of knew what the outcome was. I found that pretty impressive. So, and there's also stuff that's built up in a nice way to where you're like kind of anticipating a flashback, and it pays off well. Like how we get the vibe of Murray's relationship with his son, who is a mostly unseen character until like kind of the second half. And so we're kind of waiting to see where that part of his character is coming from, and then we finally do get a scene towards the end that's a flashback of him with his son. And it starts off as the dynamic you would expect, and then goes in another direction, and I thought that was really interesting too. Where it feels like everything is set up in the present day scenes, that we already know what's going on in the flashbacks, but then the flashbacks can sort of nudge us just a little bit in a way we're not expecting. I really like that as well. So yeah, and I was more or less pretty satisfied with how it ultimately comes together, and our big explosive climax. The one thing that does hold it back, I think, is this is one of those movies where we really didn't need the last scene. The last scene feels very tacked on. We get a pretty great last shot, and then there's like one more scene, and it's like, what the fuck even was that? So yeah, minus that last scene, I'm pretty good with a lot of what's here. And like I said, this is I finally feel like I've like found something or gotten something now that Dino Montiel's made a movie where it's like, oh my god, I get this one. So, like I said, he's clearly got something, because he's been working consistently with all these people. And like I said, I can get a sense that there's something in his movies that just isn't hitting me personally, but he's clearly got something, and I'm glad that I was able to finally get like a taste of something here, of what he can do. So, I guess that's where I can leave these three. So, the next three, I'm probably going to... We all love a good Jason Statham movie, so I'm probably going to check that one out. And a couple of others. And I mentioned the animated movies and Paddington and all that. We'll talk about as well. But I'm not as much of a hurry to get to those, but we'll get to everything. So, until the next thing, I think that's it.